Today we're going to paint the Plague Marines from the Kill Team starter set. Hi all and welcome to the cabin. So I've always had a soft spot for Plague Marines. They were the first miniatures I ever laid eyes on when I started my hobby journey 24 years ago. Over the years, I've painted several different versions, and I really like the redesign introduced for the launch of 8th edition, spearheaded by Maxime Pastorel. Recently, Games Workshop released a starter set for the new edition of Kill Team, which includes 7 Death Guard operatives. These push-fit miniatures were previously released as Space Marine Heroes blind boxes, although the Malignant Plaguecaster was exclusive to Japan for a time. Also, the Death Guard recently got a new detachment on the first day of the Grotmus calendar, and I hope we get our new codex next year as well. Alright, enough babbling, let's get some paint on these. I undercoated them with the aptly named Death Guard Green, and then used my airbrush to apply a zenithal highlight of Nurgling Green. If you don't own an airbrush, you could drybrush this color instead or skip this stage altogether. To add definition, I washed the armor panels with Athonian Camoshade. Plague Marines should look dirty, so to increase the grime and further tint the armor, I repeated this step twice. Afterwards, I returned to Nurgling Green and edge highlighted all the armor. This can take some time, so you might prefer to use a drybrush instead. With the armor done, it's time for the details, and let's just say that there isn't a lack of that on these minis. I used Leadbelcher for the cables, chains, shoulder trims, and weapons. For the trim around the neck, heraldry, bells, and pendants, I opted for Balthasar Gold. I then washed all these metallic areas with Agrax Earthshade, except for the shoulder trims, plague knives, and bolt guns, as these would later receive a rust effect. To finish the metallics, I carefully drybrushed some Runefang steel over the areas. I base coated the skin, tentacles, and some of the Nurglings with Rakarth flesh. And for the pustules, I used Bestigor flesh. These areas were washed with Carroburg Crimson. I then layered Rakarth flesh back onto the skin. In hindsight, I could have diluted the Carroburg Crimson with Lahmian Medium to skip this stage. Afterwards, I highlighted the skin with a 50-50 mix of Rakarth flesh and Pallid Witch flesh. The pustules were highlighted with Kislev flesh. Screamer Pink was my choice for loincloths, other fabrics, and the mouths, tongues, and wounds on the Nurglings. I washed these areas with Carroburg Crimson and highlighted them with Pink Horror. For the skulls and horns, I used Ushapti Bone as a base coat, with a wash of Seraphim Sepia afterwards. To deepen the shadows, I applied Agrax Earthshade in the recesses and eye sockets. Finally, I highlighted them with Screaming Skull. I chose Gorthor Brown for the wooden handguards and the Plaguecaster's staff, followed by a wash of Agrax Earthshade and a highlight of Baneblade Brown. The leather straps and gun holsters were base coated with Steel Legion Drab, washed with Agrax Earthshade, and highlighted with Zandri Dust. To tie it all together and tint the leather with a reddish hue, I washed it with Reikland Fleshshade. The smoke, fungi, and fly wings were base coated with Celestra Grey, followed by a highlight of Ulthuan Grey. I applied Dreadful Visage on the fly wings and Coelia Green shade diluted with Lahmian Medium on the rest. For the fungi, I also added Drakenhof Nightshade, again diluted with Lahmian Medium. For the maggots, both big and small, I used Averland Sunset as a base coat. I then washed them with Kazandora Yellow and added highlights of Uriel Yellow and finally Dorn Yellow. I chose Abaddon Black for the Plague Sword as well as the fly bodies and armor seals. As a first highlight, I used the Fang, and then a selective highlight of Fenrisian Grey. To bring everything together, I washed these areas with Drakenhof Nightshade. All the little details add to the look of the miniatures and make sure that each one stands out with its own identity. There's a lot of cool visual storytelling going on, but I have to admit I was feeling some fatigue at this point. Even the bases are crammed with details. Oh well, let's get on with it. On the subject of bases, I kept these separate and undercoated them with Mechanica Standard Grey. Next up, I washed them with Drakenhof Nightshade and dry brush them with Rust Grey, followed by a selective dry brush of Fenrisian Grey. Some of the remaining Nurglings were base coated with Azandri Dust, followed by a wash of Reikland Fleshshade, and a highlight with Karak Stone. The final batch were base coated with Elysian Green, washed with Croak Green, and highlighted with Ogryn Camo. For the dripping slime, I used Warpstone Glow and a highlight of Moot Green. We'll return to these and finish them at a later stage. I began painting the eye lenses with a base coat of Abaddon Black. After that, I added a tiny dot of white scar towards the upper left section. I then layered Corn Red on most of the remaining black area. I used Wazdaka Red to highlight the lenses towards the lower right direction. Lastly, I added a thin line of Wild Rider Red here as a highlight. For the plasma pistol, I started with a dry brush of Wazdaka Red around the coils. Next up, I painted the coils with Fire Dragon Bright. I then watered down Dorn Yellow and applied it in the recesses towards the bottom to represent the glow of the plasma. To make the surface of the coils appear less warm than the plasma beneath, I layered on Wild Rider Red, followed by Wazdaka Red on the top, and lastly Corn Red selectively. Oh, and I also painted the base rim with Abaddon Black. At this stage, I applied a 50-50 mix of matte and satin varnish through my airbrush. Now it's time to add some effects, starting with Nihilakh Oxide on all the golden areas to simulate verdigris. After that, I applied Nurgle's Rot on all the slime. I used pigments from Vallejo to achieve realistic rust, starting with burnt sienna mixed with pigment binder on the shoulder trims, bolt guns, and plague knives. I also added old rust in the same way but selectively as a highlight. After that, I painted burnt umber in the recesses. To really sell the effect, I used an old brush to add Runefang steel to the edges. The final touch was to selectively apply rust streaks from AK Interactive with a synthetic brush. I then dampened the brush with mineral spirits and blended the streaks for a more realistic look. And with that, the Plague Marine kill team is complete. Although they took longer to finish than expected, it was a lot of fun painting these. I think they look great together as a kill team, but also blend right in with my existing collection of Death Guard miniatures. Like I said before, I'm a big fan of this aesthetic, and it's nice to have a growing army that I can field on the tabletop. But for now, I think I need to take a bit of a break from the servants of Nurgle and their intricate details. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. A special thank you to Arnold over on Patreon. And if you want to support us, all the links are in the description down below. We'll see you next time. Good luck with your miniatures.